Hello and welcome to this presentation introducing SPSS, the statistical software program for use in education research, particularly in the Ethiopian context. This presentation is for Wallow University's CUIN 841 course. And in it, I'm primarily going to be using SPSS version 29 to demonstrate some of sort of the basic ways to navigate the platform, but there aren't that many changes usually from version to version, so this should be pretty useful even if you're using a different version such as 27 or 30. I should have also mentioned that I am using a Mac laptop to develop this video and to run my analyses. So my SPSS is found for my Mac, under my Applications tab, and right here, IBM SPSS Software Statistics. So we're going to use the original version of SPSS. We're not going to be using Python or R in this demonstration. So that is the application that you should open up. So you just click on the icon on your Mac or on your PC, and you should see your program open up like this. And so I'm going to be using the data set that we've created for this course. On your main page, you can either open your data set from there, and SPSS, like many programs, will remember what you were working on previously, or you can just close that up and go straight to the default display, which is an empty data set here. So I'm going to, as I mentioned, open up my data set to show you some basics of how to use the program. And so I have it saved in my downloads file actually. And so I'll just click on that file, or I could have gone into the menus, also File, Open, Data, and then browsed to where my data set is. Okay. So this view here, which is the default that SPSS opens up into, is called the data editor view, and it looks like this. So you can see on the bottom, there are links to the three views in traditional SPSS displays. This first one here, you can click on each to access them. The overview display, it's a basic summary of your data set that SPSS generates to give you a snapshot idea of what's in your data set. You won't use it as often as you do the other two options typically. So we have our data view then here, and then actually this, just to clarify, is essentially a spreadsheet of your data with individual cases, which could be responses to a survey instrument or a record in an institutional data set. Those are in the rows. The records are in the rows. In my data set here, we're pretending that each row is a student who responded to a survey instrument. So each student is represented by a row. And then each of the variables in our data set are here, the items from our survey instrument. The variables are in these columns here. So first of all, how do you know what these columns actually represent? Like, what's dig, inster, frec? For that answer, you'll want to go to the variable view. Okay, so here we are in our variable view, where every row in this display represents a different variable in my data set, of which I have 14 total right now. So if I went over to my data view, you'd see up here across the top, there are 14 variables, and each of the names at the top of my columns corresponds to this name in the first column on the variable view. I, or you as the researcher, decide what to name each of your variables. One thing that's important to realize is that SPSS only has some characters that it doesn't allow for variable names, including like a space. So if you come down here to create a new variable, or you just go in and try to change the name of a variable, and you go in and you can just start typing, if you use a character that it doesn't allow, you will get an error, illegal character. So you can't use a space. Okay. So let's say, so it takes away that variable. It's not going to let me do that. So I could either come back down here and type in a proper variable name and it would appear, or if you have a large data set and you want to put a variable, insert a new variable somewhere in the middle of your variable view, you could right click on the place where you want to add it and go to right click, insert variable. And so SPSS actually will give you a default variable name and sort of input default information here on your variable view. So now I have 15 variables, and if I go to my data view, there will be a new variable here called var002, but of course there's no data here since we didn't input any data yet or collect any data around this, so we would have to take care of that separately. But if you want to create a new variable, that's essentially how you do it. Another thing that this view specifies is the type of data that each variable is. So of course, for the most part, we'll be using numeric variables, which means the variable contains numbers, and then we can just do calculations off of it basically. But SPSS also has other types of variables, and if you come here to any of your individual variables and you click on the little 3 dots next to its type, SPSS will pull up all of the different options you have here. In terms of, maybe you want to do something in BER, so you could set that up here and specify what that would look like. The vast majority of variables you'll use, though, will likely be numeric. But something to realize, too, though, are string variables. So string basically refers to characters, like letters, where SPSS can't run calculations on. So if you had somebody's name maybe as a variable or something like that, you might, again, like I said, get an error sometimes that your variable type, you can't run the analyses due to the type of variable that you have defined. So you might need to come in here and change it if you've accidentally tried to run a calculation on a string variable. Oh, 2 other things that are specified here in your variable type column as well as in your variable view are the widths of your variables. So that's basically the number of digits maximum that your variable can include. The default is 8 digits, but you can change this value if you want to make it higher or lower. Usually 8 is more than enough, but sometimes for measures with things like income or other types of things, you might want a longer width specified. The same thing with decimal places. So SPSS defaults to 2 decimal places, and it's up to you as to how high or few number of decimal places you want for each of your variables. Into the name column, there's also this label column here. It's optional. It can be empty if you want, and as you can see, when you create a new variable by SPSS, it doesn't populate the label column because it's really just there as almost like a little cheat sheet for you. Notes for you to remember what each of these individual names mean and really describing in more detail what each of the variable is, because there isn't the character limits in the label column that we have with the name column. Personally, I think it's a really, really good habit to label all of your variables in addition to naming them, because you'll often return to your data set maybe after a period of time not looking at it for a while, and the label column can help remind you of the different analyses that you've been doing in past activities. Okay, so I'm going to quickly jump over here to this measure column because it corresponds with the values column there, and they relate together. The measure column indicates what level your variable is measured at. We have 3 options: scale, nominal, or ordinal. And if you want to change it, you just click right here on the cell and it will give you those 3 options. So this matters for the future because the statistical tests you run depend on the level of measurement, scale versus nominal versus ordinal. And then also it matters in terms of the values. So for our scale variables, those do not have any values specified. This is because scales can really be any number, right? From -infinity to infinity. And then again, like we have already specified the number of decimal places over here. So we're not going to ever have values defined for our scale variables. But nominal and ordinal variables are a different story. Okay, let's start with nominal variables. I think I have 4 or 5 in this data set. So nominal variables are often used to group participants, right? Like type of university or gender or preferred mode of studying, of learning. Those are all nominal variables in my data set. There's really no order, though, to those groups, right? So public versus private, male versus female. I know that some could make a philosophical argument that there's an order and one is better than the other, but objectively they are not. So I still, though, have to assign numbers to them, right? Because SPSS can't calculate statistics on letters. Like, for example, let's say here my data view, let's say I was going to create a gender variable for this new one that I designed. I could say F for female, M for male, this guy, maybe these are all men, here's a female, I'm inputting my data, but we could never calculate any averages on this. We can't calculate any statistics, right? SPSS would give us an error. So what we have to do is we have to, for gender, let's come over here, we have to assign values and numbers and labels to those numbers. So here for gender, you click on this those three little icons here. You can see that in this data set, I've assigned the value of 1 to male and 2 to female. Let's say I actually wanted to add another value label. I was like, oh wait, I forgot. I have, some people who prefer not to indicate their gender in my data set. So maybe I'll give them 3. And so I'll type in here, prefer not to indicate. So I can add additional value labels by clicking the plus right here, or I can get rid of them, right, by clicking this red, highlighting the value and clicking this red X button. So that's how you create value labels and also refer to value labels because, again, it's useful if you haven't been in your data set for a while. It's useful to go back and say, oh, wait, what did I assign men versus women? And you can go back and check here on the value labels. So that's for nominal variables. And then, of course, we also, our third option are ordinal scales, right? And that's typically Likert scales, which have labels assigned to the values, but they have the order actually matters, right? So for example, here, self-rated digital literacy. So that has 5 possible values, but on our survey instrument, we told students what those labels represented: very low, low, average, high, very high. And so that actually matters, right? That order matters, where male versus female, it doesn't really have an order, but this does actually have an order. So that's why we make sure that in our measure column, all of our ordinal scales are properly specified as being ordinal. Because again, SPSS will not let you run certain statistics if your values and your measure specifications are not aligned with what you're asking it to run. The final, last but not least thing I'd like to point out from the variable view is this missing column. So the reality of social science research is that sometimes we have missing data in our data sets. People accidentally skip questions. Maybe they do it on purpose because they're afraid to give you answers on what you're asking about, but everyone has the right not to answer a question, right? Or provide data. So data become missing in data sets. But it's actually really important that just because we have data missing doesn't mean we should totally ignore it. So in your data view, actually, SPSS by default, you can just, if something is missing and you want to delete an answer or something, you can just come into to this data set view and just delete, hitting backspace and delete responses. And it just shows up as a blank cell with a little dot here. However, as I said, part of sort of one of the things we really want to do is to analyze and track our missing data. So oftentimes what we'll do, instead of leaving that column blank, we'll put in kind of a proxy number that represents missing to us, and it couldn't be any other value in the data set or for that variable. For instance, okay, let me go back here to this variable view to show you. So for instance, type of university, as I said here, I only gave it 2 options, assigned it 1 or 2 for public or versus private. So that's my participants in that column. They either have a 1 or a 2, or they might have a 9999, which is what I decided to code my missing. So you need, though, to tell SPSS that you're using that value. So here, you saw in that other data, the data view, I assigned 99999 to my missing cases. So now we see that updated here in the missing column. This is important for SPSS because otherwise it would not ignore that cell when it's calculating statistics. Otherwise, it would treat 9999 as an actual value. So this person had 1, this person had 999, this person had 5, this person had 4, and that would really screw up our results, right? And so you have to tell SPSS, oh, we have missing, and I've coded it as 9999, so skip over that value in my analysis. But the reason why it's good to have those independently identified is that we can also do some analyses on who skipped the items and why maybe come to some sort of analyses and some conclusions about why maybe they skipped that item, and whether or not the overall data that are missing in my data set, all of these 9999s, is that at random, or is it because I had a design flaw and created some bias or have some issues with internal validity around how I collected my data? So I know this is a lot right now if you're just learning SPSS, but the main thing to know and to take away is that don't use just blank cells for your missing data. Make sure to go back through and tell SPSS or code the missing data as a discrete value, and then make sure too that it's indicated here on the SPSS variable view. And that actually brings us back to, you'll recall, the overview view in our SPSS software platform. So if we go there, overview, you can see, you'll remember I said that this view sort of summarizes our data set. And so what you do, yours might be blank right now if you have it open, because you have to at first click here in this left corner and tell it to update the view. Sometimes it doesn't do that automatically and you have to tell it to update this view. But essentially what's really nice is right here on the top right side, it will give you a summary of how and where data are missing in your data set. It will also give you sort of a snapshot of the types of data, the levels of measurement you have in your data set, as well as some basic statistics down here that we'll get into in other lessons. But it's a really useful, again, place to kind of check out to have a better understanding of what's in your data set. The final thing I want to leave you with is that as you start making changes to your data set, whatever, you will see SPSS does not save these automatically. Usually, and I want to caution you very carefully about version control of your data sets and saving updates that you might sort of regret in the future. So usually what I do is I save the original version of my data set, and if I start doing analyses and making changes, I'll save a new copy of it, right? So go up here to File, Save As, and then allow whatever, save a new, rename it maybe at of the date. Maybe I'll say, all right, here's my original data set, but here today is the June 19th version of that data set. That's because once you write over and save over your data, you're not going to be able to go back to the previous version unless you've saved the original version. So this is something where I strongly encourage you, again, be saving your changes, but make sure not to overwrite something that you might regret in the future, particularly your original data set. So this is kind of the basics of the 3 different views for SPSS. And hopefully this gives you a good introduction to how to navigate.